Hello and welcome to Franchise Mondays, a new segment on this channel where I talk about a lot of known franchises. For today's episode, I am reviewing the Steven Seagal franchise. Now, I know you're asking, how does Steven Seagal constitute as a franchise? Well, very much like Sylvester Stallone, Jean-Claude Van Damme, you don't go to watch those movies for the story. If you do, then I don't understand why you're watching their films, because for the most part, you go to a Jean-Claude Van Damme film to see him do his splits and his great roundhouse kicks. You go to see Stallone to see him shoot people or fight in a Rocky movie. But same thing goes for Steven Seagal. You go to watch his films for the great Aikido moves, and all those really cool sequences. So, very much like the previous episodes, I'm going to review the first four films in his filmography. The first four, which I think are some of his best films. The first one being Above the Law, second one being Hard to Kill, third being Out for Justice, and the last one being Marked for Death. The first three films were released by Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers had a contract with Steven Seagal, and they released a lot of his films. And Marked for Death was released by 20th Century Fox. So the first film, Above the Law, was released in 1988, I believe, and that was his first film. And curious enough, unlike any other actor that I can think of, Seagal had no had never worked in another film previously. He had never done any cameo appearances. Above the Law was the first film he starred in. And the only thing I can think of that he did was he was a stunt coordinator in a James Bond movie called Never Say Never Again, which he actually accidentally broke Sean Connery's hand. So Above the Law is a story of Nico Toscani, and he was in Vietnam, and he witnessed a lot of crazy shit that the CIA was doing, and he's now living in Chicago, I believe. He's a cop, and everything seems normal, and a lot of his buddies who were in war, a lot of the people that he wanted to avoid, are now in Chicago doing a lot of weird and crazy illegal things, mostly transporting C4 and laundering money. So it's up to him to stop this underground. Now the story is a little convoluted, unnecessarily convoluted, but it still is comprehensible. Steven Seagal is in his best shape in this film. He's pretty svelte. He's pretty fast in this film. I legitimately think this is a good action film. A lot of people don't mention it as much, but the movie also has Pam Grier as his partner. Has a lot of other actors who were in a lot of films directed by Andrew Davis. Andrew Davis directed a lot of films for Chuck Norris, one of them being Code of Silence. So if you've seen Code of Silence, you'll see some of the actors in that film also in Above the Law. So I generally like this one. It's the only one I can think of where you actually see Seagal get beat up, like actually beat up, where it's not him just fighting a whole bunch of people and he never gets hurt. He actually does get hurt in this film. So I generally like this one. The second one that followed, I think, was released a year or two later, and that's Hard to Kill. In Hard to Kill, he looks a little bit bigger, like not necessarily fat. He actually looks still in good shape. And this movie, he is filming this guy who's running for senator, doing a lot of illegal business, and they find him and they kill his wife, and they try to kill him, but it just leaves him in a coma for 7 years. The premise of this film seems very similar to what you see also in Kill Bill, where someone stays in a coma for a long time and they wake up and they're out for revenge. And that's what happens in this film. He wakes up from a 7-year coma. But unlike in Kill Bill, it's actually pretty realistic here. It takes him a while to start walking again, to start moving normally, and I like that. The story isn't that original, but it's entertaining. There's a lot of cool action sequences. Again, he has no stunt doubles in this film, so the sequences are him doing most of the Aikido fighting. It has his then wife, I forget her name, but she plays the love interest in this film. Definitely worth watching. And it was followed by another film. It's not a sequel, it's just another film within the Warner Brothers catalog of films that he did with Steven Seagal. And that movie's Out for Justice, which I think is one of his most violent films. It's in this one he plays an Italian. I don't know how Steven Seagal constitutes as an Italian. He doesn't. He just impersonates a stereotypical Italian guy who has family in the mafia, and he's also a cop, and he's considered like the black sheep of the family because he's trying to stop this guy whose name is Richie, who is going crazy, killing people and shit. So it's up to Seagal to stop him, and he'll stop at nothing to get him killed, to just get rid of him. So this movie has a lot of sequences that I find unnecessarily violent, particularly the last act of the film where Seagal is fighting Richie. And Richie is this big fat guy who is just doesn't give a shit. He just kills people because he feels like it. But that sequence alone, this is where it starts showing that Seagal is just an unstoppable guy. Like that's what I don't like. He doesn't get beat up at all, and he just literally destroys this guy to the point where I'm like, is it really that necessary? I understand he's a bad guy, but it's just like, why? Just you can just take him to prison and call it a day. But no, they just really go for it. So the last one, this was the one of the first 3 films that he did over Warner Brothers, and then he did one movie, the only movie I can think of that he did for 20th Century Fox, and that's Marked for Death. Marked for Death takes place in part of it takes place here in the States, and the other part takes place in Jamaica, and they're trying to stop this guy named Screwface, who's a drug dealer, who is trying to control like the whole drug empire, and that's basically the plot. That's very simple, and it's perhaps even more violent than Out for Justice, but it's perhaps the most violent of his films in its entirety. Out for Justice being the most violent that he did for Warner Brothers, and this one being the most violent that he did for 20th Century Fox. And in this film, there's some really cool stuff. He actually get to see him do not just Aikido stuff, but you actually see him doing a lot of shooting, which is pretty cool. He's still in pretty good shape in this film. The story is simple, and that's why it works. That's why a lot of his early films are good, because they're not that convoluted. They're not incomprehensible like a lot of his newer films are, which are necessarily confusing. They make very little to no sense, and it just bothers me that there's some fans out there who legitimately think they're good movies. I, for one, I watch them for unintentional humor. The new ones, that is. The first 4 that I mentioned, I think, are actually good films from the late 80s, early 90s. So if you're looking for a good action film to watch, I definitely recommend Above the Law, Hard to Kill, Out for Justice, and Marked for Death. So that was my take on these first 4 films that Steven Seagal did, which are in fact a franchise, because like I said, you don't go to see a Steven Seagal movie for the story, you go to see his Aikido moves. So I hope you guys enjoyed this review. If you have any questions, comments, please leave it on the comment section down below. And until next time.